I've learned that sometimes the most painful betrayals don't announce themselves with the crash of a door or the venom of a shouted insult. Instead, they're served quietly, in elegant spaces where your loved ones pretend you no longer exist. That's what happened to me. My family erased me, bit by bit, with carefully choreographed smiles and polite toasts that excluded my name. This is the story of how I discovered that I wasn't just being left out by accident. They were actively planning around me, removing me from every legal document and family narrative until I finally stood up and found my own way out. My name is Naomi, and this is how I stopped being silent. 2 hours before the dinner that would break something inside me forever, I was standing on my porch, locking my front door with trembling fingers. I didn't understand why I felt so uneasy. After all, my parents had invited me, hadn't they? Or so I'd been told by a cousin. The invitation never arrived in my mailbox or my email. If I was honest with myself, I already suspected I wasn't really wanted at this gathering, but that quiet, gnawing hope in my chest insisted maybe they'd turned a corner. Maybe this was the night they'd finally treat me like I mattered. It was raining. Typical for our city in early autumn, the skies a shade of dull gray that matched my mood. I took an Uber to the restaurant because I didn't want to circle the block for parking. My fingertips drummed nervously on my purse during the ride, wondering what fresh humiliation I might face. Over the last year, my father Richard and my mother Celeste had grown increasingly distant. We barely exchanged texts. My only sibling, a younger brother named Damien, acted like I was an inconvenience when I tried to contact him. Yet here I was, heading to a high-end dinner in his honor, or so I assumed. When I arrived, I was technically 3 minutes early, but still felt late. It was the kind of restaurant that appeared in glossy magazines described as upscale minimalism. Everything inside was beige or pale gold, from the plush chairs to the drapes, giving off a hushed aura that made me feel like I was disturbing the stillness with each step. The servers walked as if their shoes were lined with velvet. Their voices were soft and carefully modulated, like they were trying not to wake a sleeping baby. My parents had reserved a long, candlelit table near the back, just beneath a massive brass chandelier. About 15 people were already seated when the host escorted me over. No one really looked up when I arrived, so I slid into a seat between a potted ficus and my cousin's new boyfriend. The boyfriend tried to be friendly for about a minute, but got my name wrong, Nadia, then gave up after I corrected him twice. Across the table, near the center, was Damien. He was already holding court, weaving some story that had the group of extended relatives and family friends leaning in. Everyone seemed to adore him. Even as a child, he'd had a knack for being the center of attention, with a practiced charm reminiscent of a local politician up for re-election. My mother stood beside him, nodding and smiling, her posture radiating pride. My father's eyes practically glowed with admiration. It felt like I'd stumbled onto the set of a carefully orchestrated stage play, and my seat was in the darkest corner. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked what I'd been up to. The day's typical pleasantries, "How's life, Naomi?" never arrived. A half-beat of awkward tension buzzed in my ears, but I quickly forced a polite smile. That was my reflex. I made small talk with my cousin, Tatiana, who was 2 seats down. She was busy describing her new kitchen remodel. Whenever she looked in my direction, I nodded along and contributed small compliments. That's impressive. Sounds beautiful, though my heart wasn't really in it. The entire table vibrated with a sense of happy reunion, but I felt locked out. Then, at some unspoken signal, Damien picked up a champagne flute and tapped lightly on its rim. The table fell silent. Waiters scurried to top off glasses. I grabbed the water in front of me, the only thing I'd been served so far, and braced myself. "First off," Damien began, "thank you everyone for being here. It means the world to be surrounded by such wonderful people, especially the two who shaped me into the man I am today, the best parents a kid could ask for." Polite applause rippled through the group. My father, beaming like a proud father in a lawnmower commercial, raised his own glass. My mother's eyes shone with that mixture of love and vanity, as if to say, "Yes, I raised a star, didn't I?" I waited for the second part of the toast, the moment when he'd address the rest of the family, maybe even me. My chest fluttered with a foolish hope that he might mention me in a positive light. "And second," Damien continued, turning to flash a bright grin at my parents, "thank you for raising the greatest only child in the world." It hit like a punch to the gut. Time slowed. I actually stopped breathing for the space of a heartbeat, waiting for a reaction. Anyone, my mother, father, a cousin, a friend, someone had to correct him, right? To say, "Wait, Naomi is here? What do you mean, only child?" Instead, my mother lifted her glass with a tight little smile. My father chuckled like it was an inside joke. The others either laughed politely or sipped their drinks, unbothered. If I had doubted before that they saw me as inconsequential, that moment sealed it. Inside me, something shifted, like a heavy door slamming shut. My hand clenched around the base of my water glass, but I didn't flinch outwardly. My expression remained calm. The stony composure came from years of practice. I learned that if you show you're hurt, it just bounces off their armor. Better to remain still, to let the enormity of the insult sink in. Damien kept talking. I barely registered his words. They were about how adorable he'd been as a toddler, how many photos of him hung on our parents' walls, or some other self-congratulatory anecdote. I couldn't focus because my ears had filled with a new kind of silence. Not a numbness. It was too cold for that. Colder, sharper, more resolute. Beneath the table, I felt the weight of the envelope in my purse. I had spent months preparing it. A carefully folded piece of paper, a gracious gesture I'd intended to give my parents. It was a note thanking them for stepping up at a time I was at my lowest. Tucked inside was a certified check, more money than I'd ever had in my account at once, meant as a gift. I convinced myself that giving them this check was my chance to start fresh, to let go of old hurts and show them I still wanted to belong. But now, after that toast, I wasn't sure they deserved it. The table erupted into soft laughter again. I caught the tail end of Damien's punchline, something about his baby pictures. My mother had that delighted smile she always wore when he was the center of attention. My father's approval radiated across his face, so strong you could practically feel the heat of it. Me, I was an afterthought, or more accurately, an erasure. People often wonder if you can pinpoint the first time you realize you're an outsider in your own family. For me, the moment wasn't a single event. It was more like an accumulation of minor slights that stacked into a mountain over time. But for the sake of telling this story, I'll share a few that stand out, the ones that stung enough to leave a bruise on my heart. About a year before the toast, I tried to do something meaningful for my father, Richard, on his birthday. He'd always said he loved old family photographs, stories of his own grandparents, or the home he grew up in. So I collected pictures from every corner of our cluttered attic. They were disorganized and dusty, some torn or faded. I spent weeks scanning them on my laptop, editing them for clarity, even colorizing a few black and white prints so they looked vibrant and new. Then I arranged them in a keepsake album, writing captions by hand. Richard's first camping trip, 1974, or Mom and Dad's wedding day. The final product made me proud. It was something personal, an effort I hoped might touch his heart. At his birthday lunch, I wrapped the album in gold paper and handed it to him. He unwrapped it and blinked slowly like he'd been handed a tax bill. The reaction was a monotone. Oh, that's nice. Then he passed it to my mother, Celeste, who flipped through maybe 5 pages before shutting it and asking if someone could pass the bread. Then they both set it aside and resumed chatting with Damien about some new job prospect he had on the horizon. I never saw that album again. I bet it got tossed or buried under random junk in their house. The disregard was so blatant that it felt like a public statement. Your sentiment doesn't matter here. That same year, I poured my feelings into a birthday card for my father. A full page, written in neat handwriting, filled with thanks for everything he'd done for me in childhood, driving me to soccer practice, teaching me how to ride a bike, telling jokes that made me groan but also laugh. I tucked it into the same envelope as Damien's card, so they'd be read one after another. But at the table, my father opened Damien's first. A quick comedic card with a one-liner about how only a man with superhuman endurance could stay married to Celeste for 40 years. Everyone laughed, some to the point of tears, and the card was passed around while people admired the punchline. Mine? It stayed unopened under a napkin. Not once did they ask, "Naomi, do you have a card too?" Nothing. By the end of the meal, it was lying face down near the breadbasket. I quietly slipped it into my purse when I left. I remember sitting in my car outside their house after that lunch, the engine idling. I wasn't even crying, just sitting there, waiting, maybe hoping that someone would run out and knock on my window, saying, "We're sorry, we didn't mean to ignore you." But it never happened. The incident that truly hammered the lesson home occurred roughly a year ago. I'd landed in the emergency room around 2 a.m, racked with abdominal pain so severe I thought it might be my appendix or some dreadful food poisoning. My hands were shaking, my cheeks burning with fever, and every breath felt like a stab. When the nurse went to insert an IV, they found me so dehydrated that they had to try multiple times to find a decent vein. As I sat there, alone in a sterile ER cubicle with harsh fluorescent lights, I called my mother, straight to voicemail. I tried my father's number, voicemail again. Out of desperation, I texted them both. In ER, not okay. No reply. The hours crawled by, the pain pulsing through my stomach, the IV's rhythmic drip providing a lullaby of sorts. Eventually, around 9 a.m., I got a text from my mother. "Sorry, I was wiped out after Damien's work dinner. Everything all right?" I answered, "Hospitalized." 5 minutes later, her response arrived. "Must be that sensitive stomach. You should really stop with all that takeout." No call, no offer of help, no additional follow-up. It was as if I were discussing a mild headache, not the fact that I had spent half the night doubled over in pain, alone in a hospital bed. Sitting there on that stiff ER mattress, the IV beep marking time, I felt something inside me freeze over. I realized, they don't come when I need them. They never have. They likely never will. No tears fell, just a grim acceptance. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place shortly before that now infamous dinner. My cousin Mia messaged me on social media, apologizing for missing me at a brunch I supposedly hadn't shown up to. "You'd have been so proud of Damien," she wrote. "He announced he's the new executive of the family trust." Confused, I scrolled my cousin's timeline and saw photos of that brunch, my parents, a few aunts and uncles, and even some relatives who rarely left their home states. There was Damien, standing at the head of the table, raising a glass. The caption read, "To the future of our family. Congrats, Damien." The post was dated a week prior. Nobody had mentioned it to me. Not an invite, not a courtesy call or text afterward. It was a grand celebration of handing over the reins to the next generation, and they hadn't bothered to inform me. The phone in my hand felt heavier than lead as I stared at the pictures. They hadn't merely forgotten. They'd actively chosen not to include me. So, by the night of the only child toast, I had all the evidence I needed to confirm what I'd feared for a long time. My parents and Damien weren't just neglecting me, they were erasing me from the story. Back in that hushed, upscale restaurant, I sat among these people, my so-called family, watching them celebrate a brother who had essentially declared himself an only child. My mother, father, and the others validated his words with laughter and nods, like my presence at the far end of the table meant nothing. The candle in front of me flickered, reflecting off the polished cutlery. My plate remained untouched. I honestly couldn't recall what I had ordered. Appetizer, entree, none of it mattered anymore. I was too numb to register hunger. Instead, I replayed each memory of being pushed aside, from the unread card to the lonely hospital stay, letting them solidify my resolve. Across the table, Damien launched into another charming anecdote about our childhood, some story involving rubber ducks in a kiddie pool. Somehow, he turned it into a comedic moment starring him, while my mother snickered and my father nodded approvingly. I recognized the dynamic as a stage performance, like they'd rehearsed these lines and gestures before, each on cue. Then came the moment when everything shifted irrevocably. My second cousin, Tatiana, leaned over and whispered to me, "Hey, is it true you told your mom you didn't want to be part of the family anymore? That you were done with all this?" I blinked, struggling to process her question. "What are you talking about?" She glanced around nervously. "They said you've been telling people you're out. You know, that you want nothing to do with your parents or Damien. Something about you being too emotional and needing space." A jolt shot through my chest. Anger, betrayal, sorrow. Some potent blend of all three. That was it then. They weren't just ignoring me. They were weaving a whole new story, telling relatives I had chosen to leave them, that I was the problem. If I'd wondered before whether their neglect was intentional, now I had proof. They were planting false narratives behind my back, effectively turning me into the pariah who'd left them all because she's too sensitive. I realized the entire table was still abuzz with conversation, unstoppable in its frivolous flow, while I confronted this tiny corner of whispered truth. Damning as it was, no one would have guessed from the outside that a bomb just went off in my mind. Dinner dragged on for another half hour. The servers cleared plates, offered coffee or dessert menus. I quietly excused myself, stepping into the foyer of the restaurant where a bar area and a few lounge chairs provided a bit more breathing room. Outside the window, I could see the sidewalk shining under streetlights, the asphalt still wet from the earlier rain. If I looked over my shoulder, I could just catch a glimpse of the candlelit table where my family continued to chat, as though the only child remark hadn't shifted the entire cosmos. A moment later, my mother came out, clutching her shawl. She looked surprised to see me standing there by myself, but she approached anyway. "Naomi, dear, why are you lurking out here?" she asked, voice laced with that affected warmth she used in front of other people. When we were alone, the warmth usually vanished. I straightened my shoulders. "Why have you been telling people I don't want to be part of the family?" She blinked, a silent moment passing. "What do you mean? We're not telling them anything you haven't already shown." Her words were a loaded gun, fired point blank. "Shown them? Like the fact that I've still been sending gifts, calling, trying to get you or Dad to respond?" My voice stayed composed, but my heart hammered. She shrugged in that maddeningly dismissive way. "You've always been sensitive, Naomi. You get upset so easily." That single word, sensitive, had become her catch-all label for me, implying that my feelings were simply a flaw in my character. "And you've always found ways to weaponize that," I replied, keeping my voice level. "But let me be very clear. The lies about me telling everyone I didn't want to be part of this family? Stop that. Right now." She shifted her gaze, jaw tightening. "I'm not sure I like your tone." "I'm not sure I like having my existence erased," I said. "But here we are." She opened her mouth, maybe to retort. I didn't let her. I took a half step forward, voice calm and firm. "If you spread one more false story about me or feed anyone else that nonsense about me choosing to be gone, I will respond. Not quietly, not politely, and definitely not privately." Her eyes widened slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to push back. She didn't say anything. After a tense moment, I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. My father hadn't even come looking for me, and I didn't care. The next morning, I was pouring a second cup of coffee in my tiny kitchen when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marina, a friend who'd practically become family to me and her partner, Leon. My heart quickened. Marina seldom called this early. When I answered, her voice was already shaking. Naomi, someone sent us an email last night. Screenshots of messages you wrote years ago. They're out of context. Ice bloomed in my chest. I had a sudden gut-churning suspicion of who was behind it. What did they say? They're texts you sent me and Leon months, no, years ago. Times you vented about feeling alone, about being angry with your parents, or with us in some confusion. I'm not sure who would send them. The address is anonymous. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Years ago, I used to trust Damien with some of my device backups, especially when I was between phones. It was a naive mistake. Apparently, he'd kept those archives and was now distributing them, spinning them to paint me as irrational or unhinged. Are you upset with me? I asked quietly. Of course not, Marina said, her voice thick with concern. We know you were just talking through your feelings, venting, but we wanted you to know what's happening in case it's part of something bigger. I gritted my teeth. Thank you for telling me. We hung up and my mind raced through possibilities. Why go after my friendships? Because that was the final support system I had. If my family could isolate me by making me look volatile and unpredictable, I'd have nowhere else to turn. This was more than petty revenge for me calling them out. It was an orchestrated plan to ensure no one believed my side of the story. I opened my email, anger simmering. Each time I reread those old messages, I remembered the nights I wrote them. Lonely, frustrated nights, speaking truths I had no one else to tell. They weren't malicious, just honest expressions of exhaustion. Now my family wanted to twist them into proof that I was unstable, hoping to pit my closest friends against me. I clicked compose on a new email. The recipients, my mother, my father, and Damien. Subject line, you started this. My message was simple. If you want to drag me into the dark, I'll bring it into the light. Don't confuse my past silence for surrender. Send one more anonymous tip, or spread one more lie, and I'll make sure the truth reaches every person you've deceived. No signature, no love, just my name, Naomi. Then, in a separate email to Marina and Leon, I attached a scanned copy of the letter that had been intended for my parents, the note with the $65,000 check. I wrote, "They're trying to shake your faith in me. I trust you, and I want you to know the truth about what I was originally going to give them, and why I'm not anymore." I ended the email with, "Your silence was never my weakness." Then I hit send, heart pounding. Less than a day later, the next blow came. I was standing in line at the pharmacy, waiting to pick up a migraine prescription. When I handed the clerk my insurance card, her brows knitted in confusion. She typed something into her register, then typed again, frowning at the screen. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but it says the policy is inactive." Inactive? My voice trembled. Since when? She printed a slip and handed it to me. Words in crisp black text. Coverage terminated on April 6th. That was months ago. For years, my father's name had been on the policy, a leftover from a time I was in graduate school, and he'd insisted I remain under the family plan, just in case. I had no idea they'd canceled me without a word. They'd let me believe I was insured, but it had been a lie for months. My phone buzzed right then. I stepped aside to read the text from Leon's number, but it was Marina's voice on the line when I answered. "Naomi, we got a letter. A legal letter." A weight pressed down on my chest. "From who?" She read haltingly, "The estate of Richard and Celeste Price hereby demands the return of any and all financial gifts made under emotional duress or mental instability. They say you were not of sound mind." I nearly dropped my phone. So they were claiming that any check I'd given or planned to give was invalid because I was unstable. It was laughable, except the intimidation factor was real. They were scaring my friends, the people I considered more family than my actual blood relatives. "Send me a photo of the letter," I said, managing to keep my voice steady. "I'll handle it." We hung up. I sat in my car, outside the pharmacy, staring at that termination slip and the digital copy of the legal threat. My parents had drawn a line in the sand. They wanted to punish me for challenging them publicly, so they were using their finances and influence to isolate me further. Canceling my insurance? That was potentially dangerous. If I got sick or injured, I'd be on my own. They likely hoped the threat of losing coverage would force me to back down, except they'd already cut me off quietly. Only now was it coming to light. I inhaled, then exhaled. No tears came. Instead, a sense of grim determination washed over me. Fine, I thought. They want to make this a battle? Let's fight properly. I called the law office number from the demand letter, asked to speak to the attorney's assistant, and calmly spelled out my stance. "I've compiled every receipt, every email, every voice memo. I have a recorded voicemail that will unravel your entire argument if you force me to use it. If your clients want to continue this charade, I hope they're prepared for what I'll bring to court." A long silence on the other end of the line. Then the assistant muttered, "I'll relay that message to Mr. Hansen." I hung up. My hands weren't shaking. If anything, I felt a rare, clear-headed calm as I realized that I was done rolling over. They had always hoped I'd remain silent. Now they had to contend with a Naomi who was fully prepared to defend herself. That evening, I pulled out a large file storage box from my closet. Inside, I had saved old letters, random keepsakes, printed emails, texts, evidence of times my family had undermined me. Years of quiet disrespect, of failing to show up for me, of rewriting me out of events. A lot of it was intangible, but I'd made a habit of documenting whenever they said or did something egregious. Perhaps I'd always known, deep down, that I might need proof if they turned outright hostile. I spent hours sorting, scanning, labeling. In one folder, the messages from the night I was in the hospital, contrasting with my mother's dismissive replies. Another folder, the screenshot of the brunch celebrating Damien's position as trust executor, which they never told me about. And yet another, a short audio file from 2 months ago, a voicemail from my mother that she must have sent accidentally, presumably believing she was talking to my father, not me. My blood still chilled when I listened to it. She's not really ours. Never felt like it. Some kids you love because you have to. The finality in her voice stung more than any of their petty sabotage. I paused the recording, clenching my jaw to hold back a rush of emotion. The words were so plainly spoken, so casual, as if she were discussing an unimportant object. I realized she probably always felt that way, that I was just an extra burden she had to tolerate. The knowledge burned. But it also freed me. I owed them nothing, not even the courtesy of quietly slinking away. They wanted war. I had the truth. I created a private drive online, uploading everything. The last thing I did was draft a short statement. I will not remain silent. No one should have to be erased or threatened into hiding. This is my story, my evidence, and my truth. Then I emailed the link to everyone who might care or might have been misled. Cousins, extended family friends, even the family lawyer, plus the few people who had reached out to me after seeing glimpses of drama on social media. If they wanted to see what was truly happening, it was all laid out, meticulously time-stamped, undeniable. The fallout was immediate. By morning, my phone pulsed with notifications from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, aunties who lived on the other side of the country, even old family friends from childhood. Some apologized, some expressed shock or confusion. Many said they had no idea how poorly I'd been treated. I believed them. My mother and father were skilled at the veneer of normalcy, and Damien excelled at playing the golden child. My mother's social media accounts vanished within hours. Damien went radio silent. My father didn't call or text. They had retreated, presumably to plan their next move or nurse their wounded pride. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over, but for the moment, I felt light. Marina and Leon, on the other hand, rallied around me. They confirmed no further legal attempts had come to reclaim the $65,000 or to discredit me. My guess? The family's lawyer realized I wasn't bluffing and that I had enough to tear apart any illusions they tried to maintain. Possibly, the idea of me sharing that voicemail publicly was too risky. Better to cut their losses and stay quiet. The side effect of this public stand was that some mutual friends, people who'd known me and Damien since childhood, slowly began to withdraw. A few sent me neutral messages. We don't want to pick sides, or hope you can work things out. But what they really meant was, we prefer not to get involved. I didn't fault them. Everyone has a limit to how much conflict they can handle. Still, it hurt to see them fade away. I understood that I was on my own path now, one that not everyone had the courage to follow. Ironically, being disowned or disclaiming the family that disowned me opened up new possibilities. In the weeks following the big reveal, I found myself with more time and mental energy to focus on a project I had been quietly developing, an advocacy service for individuals, particularly women, who had been cut off from family trusts, disinherited, or legally threatened by relatives. The concept grew out of my own experiences, realizing how many obstacles people face when they don't fit the family mold or upset certain power dynamics. Using my background in finance and research, I formed an LLC, hammered out a mission statement, and set up a small office in my apartment's spare bedroom. My early clients were folks from local support groups, single mothers, first-generation college graduates, people with complicated family histories. They arrived carrying thick folders of messy paperwork, half-finished legal forms, and pained stories of being browbeaten by manipulative parents or siblings. I recognize myself in them. They keep telling me I'm selfish for wanting my share of the inheritance, one young woman confided. They said I was worthless anyway, so I should just keep quiet, said another. Each time, I guided them through the basics of estate planning or drafting response letters. More importantly, I showed them how to document everything, how to stand firm when their families used guilt or legal intimidation. Watching them reclaim their narratives felt healing, like each success was a small blow against the old system that had tried to lock me out. Spring arrived gently, the city's trees budding with pale flowers, the sun still shy but hinting at warmth to come. 3 months had passed since the dinner where Damien toasted to being an only child. The immediate crisis had died down, replaced by a steady sense of resilience. My home was quiet, but not lonely. In place of frenzied attempts to contact my parents, I had found peace in building something that mattered to me. A few weeks later, on a clear Saturday morning, Leon and Marina pulled into my driveway, lugging bags of groceries and a toolbox. Marina had texted me the night before. "We're coming to make pancakes and fix that squeaky gate of yours, so be ready." True to her word, she set about flipping pancakes in my tiny kitchen, humming a tuneless melody. Leon stepped outside and started tinkering with the rusted hinges on my front gate, complaining playfully about how city dampness ruined everything. An hour later, we were seated around my small dining table, plates stacked with pancakes bursting with blueberries. The laughter came easily. We discussed my new clients, Marina's plan to open an Etsy shop for handmade jewelry, and Leon's next woodworking project. No tension, no forced politeness, just genuine care. As we cleared the plates, Marina said she had something for me. She pulled out a small envelope and handed it over with a shy smile. Inside was a photograph of the three of us at brunch the previous weekend, me grinning wide, Leon's arm draped over my shoulder, Marina leaning in to show me something on her phone. We looked happy, like a real family. On the back of the photo, in neat handwriting, was a note. "You don't have to be born into a family to be loved by one. You are always ours, even when they didn't see it." My eyes prickled with emotion, and I blinked quickly. "Thank you," I whispered, pressing the photo to my chest. Then I stood up, walked to my fridge, and pinned it under a magnet shaped like a tiny pine tree, right in the center, where I could see it every morning. Sometimes old wounds flare up when you least expect them. A random memory sneaks in. The dinner where your family laughed while you shrank into your seat, or the time you sat in an ER alone, waiting for a call that never came. Healing isn't linear. There are moments when you catch yourself checking your phone, half hoping you'll see your mother's name with a genuine apology, but it doesn't appear. Gradually, I learned to fill those silences with new, healthier routines. My business expanded. Word spread that I was someone who understood the heartbreak of family estrangement, who could help untangle the legal and emotional knots of being excluded from your rightful place. Clients recommended me to others. I started a weekly online support group, free of charge, where we could share stories and offer practical advice. I also invested in therapy, determined to unravel the deep-seated patterns of seeking approval from people who withheld it. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Lang, helped me see that my mother's refusal to love me wasn't something I caused. Damien's manipulations weren't my fault. My father's disregard didn't reflect my value. These truths sound obvious, but for someone used to internalizing blame, they felt revolutionary. Some nights, I cried. Other nights, I simply stared at the ceiling, letting the realization sink in that I might never mend fences with my parents. Could I live with that? Yes, I discovered. I could. Loving myself no longer hinged on their acceptance. Damien tried to reach me once, a text message, short and bitter. That was low, even for you. I saw the preview on my lock screen and deleted it without opening. Let him stew in his own resentment. He'd stolen enough of my peace. The truth is, I still believe in the concept of family, but I've learned that family isn't purely who you share blood with. It's who shows up for you when you need them. Blood alone doesn't guarantee kindness or respect. Sometimes it's the friends you choose, like Marina and Leon, who prove themselves to be the real keepers of your heart. One afternoon, I found a small, nondescript card in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. "We miss you. Please come by." No signatures, no names. Probably from my parents or someone speaking on their behalf. I showed it to Dr. Lang, who asked, "Do you want to go?" I shook my head. Not unless they're willing to have a real conversation about everything that happened, and I doubt they are. I tossed the card. No guilt, no second guessing. If they wanted to fix things, they knew how to reach me. No more cryptic notes, no more half measures. Late one night, fueled by the quiet of my apartment and the introspection of a journaling session, I decided to record a personal video. I opened my laptop, started the webcam, and took a steadying breath. My reflection stared back, eyes tired but determined. "Hi, everyone," I began softly. I don't usually share private family matters, but recently, everything changed. My brother made a toast about being an only child while I sat right there at the table. My parents co-signed that statement with their laughter. And then, behind closed doors, they tried to erase me from every legal document and every narrative, telling the rest of the family I was the one who wanted to leave. I paused, exhaling slowly. I know I'm not the only person to experience this sort of painful betrayal. That's why I'm sharing. Because I suspect some of you have been erased or overlooked by the very people meant to protect you. You might have been called too sensitive or overly emotional when you asked for basic respect. You might have discovered that your insurance was canceled, your name scratched off a family trust, or that your relatives replaced you in photographs and memories. If that rings a bell, I want you to know you're not crazy. You're not alone. I leaned closer to the camera, voice gentle but firm. Sometimes you have to choose your own peace over being accepted by a toxic dynamic. Sometimes you have to build your own table when the family you were born into refuses to set a place for you. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're surviving, and hopefully, eventually, thriving. A small smile tugged at my lips. If this resonates, or if you just need someone to say, I get it, leave a comment or drop a 1 below, or let me know where you're watching from. Because I'd love to hear your story if you have the courage to share it. And if you want to keep up with more raw, honest experiences, subscribe. Because I'm done letting silence define me. I stopped the recording and sat in the stillness of my living room for a good minute, heartbeat drumming. I realized I felt no fear, only relief. Speaking up publicly was a form of closure, or maybe a beginning. A chance to transmute the hurt into a statement of resilience. 3 months melted into 6. The city bloomed fully into summer. Bright flowers, scorching afternoons, breezy evenings. My father never attempted a phone call. My mother stayed hidden offline. Damien's only gestures were the occasional snarky text that I always deleted unread. I wasn't naive enough to think they'd had a change of heart. More likely, they were strategizing behind the scenes or trying to maintain appearances. That was no longer my concern. The clients for my advocacy service multiplied, and I moved into a slightly bigger apartment with a dedicated office. Each morning, I woke to find new emails from people describing heartbreakingly similar stories. My family disowned me because I married someone they disapproved of. My parents forcibly took my trust fund and told everyone I was ungrateful. I was cut off from insurance after I came out as LQBT. Reading them, I felt both sorrow and a strong sense of purpose. If my pain could be used to guide others toward legal and financial independence, maybe it wasn't wasted. On a humid August afternoon, I hosted a small open house, inviting local clients and supportive friends to celebrate a modest milestone, the official launch of an online platform connecting disinherited individuals with free legal resources. We gathered at a community hall near the river, sipping iced tea and sharing stories. Marina wore a bright floral dress. Leon hovered by the door, greeting people with an easy smile. To my surprise, cousin Tatiana, she of the whispered question at the dinner, showed up with an apologetic expression. She admitted she had no idea the extent of what my mother and Damien were doing. We talked for a while, bridging a gap that once felt too wide. She wasn't perfect, but she was sincere in her regret. As the night wore on, I stood by the river's edge, feeling the warm wind brush against my arms. The laughter and chatter from the hall drifted behind me. I thought about the dinner so many months ago, the hush of the restaurant, the shimmering candlelight, and Damien's mocking toast about being an only child. In a twisted way, maybe he had handed me the push I needed. If that toast hadn't happened, I might still be making polite small talk at family functions, desperate for their acceptance. Now I was free. If you've read or listened this far, perhaps you see a bit of your own story in mine. Maybe you know the sting of being pushed out by the people who should have protected you, or maybe you've always stood on the sidelines, unsure whether you had the right to speak up about how you've been treated. Let me say this plainly. You don't need their permission to exist fully. You don't have to wait for an invitation that will never come. If they're closing every door on you, build your own door. Find or create your own family. Redefine the meaning of home. Being erased is excruciating, but discovering your own strength is transformative. It might start with a quiet refusal, like that moment when I stared at my mother and said, "No more lies." Or the moment I gathered every receipt and posted the truth for all to see. It can feel terrifying. But the cost of remaining silent is so much higher. So, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, or had your name erased from their story? Or have you had to choose your peace over being accepted by toxic people? If this resonates, drop a 1 in the comments or just share your location. Tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this account sparked something in you, if it lit a tiny flame of recognition, please consider subscribing. I'll be sharing more real, unfiltered stories about navigating family estrangement, financial independence, and self-determination. Because in the end, the truth doesn't need a crowd to be valid. It just needs you to stand by it. And once you decide to stand by your truth, no amount of erasure can make you disappear. Thank you for being here with me, for reading or listening, for holding space for a story that wasn't easy to tell. Wherever you are, I hope you find the courage to speak up, to build your own table if the old one has no seat for you, and to remember, you are enough with or without their approval. Sometimes, the best families are the ones we create for ourselves, with the people who choose us and whom we choose in return. Until next time, I'm Naomi. I'm no longer silent, and I'm certainly not forgotten.